We're connected. Welcome to the second podcast of Traditional Lies, where we are auditing the translation efforts of the King James Bible translators from the original Hebrew text. Okay, so again, that's a hard pill to swallow, right? Well, let me give you some background. And so a few years ago, I learned how to read and research Hebrew. Now, what caused me to go there is I was actually visited a Bible study group where several people in the room had that skill set. They actually knew what the Hebrew text said, and when we would look at a certain verse, they would provide input about this verse. Well, my first experience of that, I was like, how do you figure this out? And they told me to go learn Hebrew, to which I thought, this is craziness. And then I learned, I'm about to sneeze, excuse me. And then I learned how easy it is to learn the Hebrew language. It took it took me 45 days with no help. Since that time, I have now assisted others to learn the Hebrew language, and I have one of my students, I say students, somebody who just listened to my advice. I didn't teach them myself, but they went and did what I spoke about in the first podcast about going and watching the videos on the Hebrew letters. And they learned how to do what I did in 45 days. They did it in 17. And that person actually told me that their job sent them out of town for 7 days, and they still claim they did it in 10. But just tell them, I love telling them, no, it took 17. And so the point there is how easy this language is to learn and how quickly you could participate for yourself and going to see the efforts and auditing for yourself the efforts of the translators of the King James translation. Now, to further go into depth in that decision, I will tell you that in the beginning when I started doing this, I felt so condemned, right? Because I was taught all my life this is the divine and inspired word of God. If you change it or whatever else, you're the eternal condemnation for entertaining this idea is just overwhelming. You're going to die in a devil's hell or something. And I realized after learning Hebrew, I only researched 3 or 4 words and realized how righteous it is to go check. It's not a condemning thing, it's a righteous thing. Learning the original language and actually taking the desire to go and check what they provided for us is not going to get you in trouble. Contrary to what you may have been taught, it's not going to get you in trouble. And so I think you'll have to go experience that for yourself. And so the first thing I'm trying to lay out in the purpose of this podcast is this is not an evil exercise. This is not an exercise that is, you know, something of a dark side. No, this is something where we're looking at exactly what it says, and what we're going to learn is the difficulty to translate this language. And so, to defend the translators, I would say that even when I talk and when I write books and try to explain what I'm learning, I realize it's just impossible to provide all the depth of each word that our Father puts into his language. It's just that, and it's not that it's that hard to learn, it's just that it's that beautiful. It's just that wonderful. And so go try it for yourself and learn for yourself. I think we're going to do a very good job at explaining these words and explaining what we learned and give you an alternative understanding to what was provided from the English Reformation period when there was tyranny taking place. And I am pretty certain, I can't prove it, but I'm pretty certain that several translators paid the ultimate price because they weren't allowed to translate the way they wanted to. But that's again, after years of research, you'll go find that and decide that for yourself. But the key here is today we have 100 English translations. I raised my kids in a church environment. I taught them the King James Bible. I taught them the other translations as they came out. We looked at 5 translations to get a clear understanding of one verse. We went through all those exercises with the English translations. And then I realized that after 100 English translations, I'm not aware of any church that has condemned a single translation. I asked a preacher friend of mine, "Do y'all have some kind of a auditing program where you actually have a group of people that check each translation when it comes out and certifies it for your church to make sure that you're not bringing an apostasy into your church?" And he laughed. He goes, we don't have that." Of course they don't. And so we have all these translations available to us, and nobody is checking, and they all say something different. And by default, because we don't declare differently, all 100 translations are declared to be divine and inspired. That's just not possible, right? And so all I'm doing is justifying the purpose of this podcast. We are now going to take off into searching these words that were not translated, they were transliterated, and we're also going to search words that were not translated at all. Yes, you're going to be stunned when you find out how many words in the original text were literally skipped. They literally were not translated at all. And so thank you for joining the podcast. And our next podcast, we'll talk about the first word that we're going to audit in the English translations. Thank you. Bye.